recent reveal of the Nintendo Switch 2, there's one question on every fan's mind. Where's Super Smash Bros? While discussion has mostly been surrounded by the new Mario Kart, Donkey Kong getting a potential redesign, if the new Joy-Con can be used as a mouse, and whatever that new C button does, it wouldn't be a new Nintendo console without the Smash fans coming out of the woodwork to center all conversation around themselves. And this time around, that comes in the form of a supposed leak for the next Smash game that has been floating around the internet and generating quite a lot of buzz. According to this rumor, Smash 6 will feature characters like Link, Samus, and Cloud getting reworks, some folks getting updated designs to match newer iterations, the return of Adventure Mode, a handful of new fighter editions, and most interestingly to me, not a single character being removed from Ultimate's huge roster, saying that Nintendo specifically requested nobody be cut. Now obviously this rumor is more than likely completely made up. It all traces back to a 4chan post with no credibility, and gaming websites like this will take the chance to report on literally anything nowadays. But I find this worth talking about because it brings to light a question that myself and many other Smash fans have been wondering for years. How the hell do you follow up Super Smash Bros. Ultimate? Super Smash Bros. Ultimate was the ultimate love letter to fans of this series. Every single character from past entries returning, some long-time requested fan favorite characters finally joining the roster, and the DLC featuring some of the craziest, most broken, most impossible, and most gimmicky fighters to ever join Smash. And everything surrounding the game's marketing and story came with this sense of finality. It was the culmination of the series, with the game director Masahiro Sakurai himself saying he was unsure if the series could ever reach these heights again. But Smash Bros. Is one of Nintendo's heaviest hitters. Even the weaker Nintendo consoles still had units flying off the shelves for Super Smash Bros. They're gonna release another one. And with the recent confirmation of the Switch 2 having backwards compatibility, the odds of it being a Smash Ultimate Deluxe remaster or port feel much smaller. So how do you follow up this game that was meant to be a swan song for several generations worth of gaming? How do you even begin to rival a roster this vast and all-encompassing? Well, the popular answer online seems to be, you don't. A lot of people think that the next Super Smash Bros. Should be some kind of reboot, a smaller roster, more refined movesets, dusting off a lot of the characters who haven't been meaningfully updated throughout the years of smashing, and putting the focus back on Nintendo. And I can definitely see the thought behind this. For every character that feels like a loving translation of everything that makes them and their games unique, there's one that feels completely stuck in the past, or worse over, not very representative of their individuality at all. Characters like Mario, Samus, Ganondorf, Donkey Kong, and the Lynx have been routinely criticized for not being very reflective of their source material, and a game that reworks these legacy characters to be more in line with their modern counterparts is an intriguing idea. Mario could have a command grab that uses Cappy, some of the weapons that he makes use of in the many RPG spin-offs, and maybe a final smash based off the Wonder Flower. Samus could have her melee counter from Metroid Dread and be a faster, more agile fighter with tons of different tools at her disposal, more in line with how she actually appears in the Metroid series. Donkey Kong could use his coconut gun that fires in spurts, throw barrels, pop out of barrels, and use the bongos again. Ganondorf could be doing literally anything that Ganondorf does in the Zelda games. He's the biggest candidate for a potential rework in my opinion, and if I had it my way, I'd base him off his Hyrule Warriors design with the big swords. We have a lot of sword fighters in Smash, but we don't have a lot of swords fighters. And the separate Links could actually have distinct movesets from one another, Link Prime being representative of the Wilds era, Toon Link more in line with the 2D games, and Young Link could be based off of Majora's Mask. And this all sounds great, right? A once-over giving love to some of these characters who feel kind of generic in the age of Steves and Heroes. But the question then becomes, who do we cut? And this is where the idea begins to fall apart for me. Many people have tried to cut the Smash roster down to 40 or so characters, and honestly, I don't know if there's a way to do this and keep everyone happy. I think a lot of people are, for lack of a better term, pretty delusional and unrealistic when it comes to this particular thought exercise, and it's hard to blame them. There's a lot of difficult questions that come with this task that lead to some unsatisfying answers. Do we cut characters that were added as cross-promotion with now dated releases, even if they have more potential for an interesting moveset than legacy characters? Do we cut popular legacy characters who haven't appeared in a title for a really long time in order to make room for more relevant modern modern additions to the Nintendo family? Similarly, do we include third parties that have a rich history with Nintendo, third parties that have incredible brand power and moveset potential behind them, or for that matter, any third parties at all? And these are all questions that we have to take into account before we even begin to talk about new fighters, because a new Smash game would naturally include characters from some newer titles, and probably some characters from some older titles as well. Most of Smash Ultimate's newcomers were characters that we had been requesting for a while. So with all of that considered, I thought I would take a stab at making a hypothetical rebooted roster for a Super Smash Bros. 6. And this is what I came up with. I came to this conclusion under the assumption that most of the legacy characters would be undergoing some kind of rework, we would want to include at least a few new faces, no third parties, and prioritizing character picks that would allow for a more varied roster while still representing all of Nintendo's history with a round number of 45 characters. And honestly, looking at it now, I kinda hate it. I did my best to be quote-unquote realistic with who stays and who goes, but you can probably already see where my biases lie. There's no way we axe too many Fire Emblem or Pokemon, and for some of the stranger characters on the roster, I tried to prioritize those with interesting gameplay gimmicks, a la Ice Climbers, Little Mac, Game & Watch, Min Min, and newcomer Karate Joe. Characters like Sheik, Zero Suit, and Diddy Kong have been folded into the movesets of Zelda, Samus, and Donkey Kong respectively. Former Echo Fighters Chrom and Daisy in this hypothetical reality have also undergone significant reworks to further diversify them. And for new characters, I chose people from franchises that Nintendo seems to be pushing harder in the later years of the Switch. Fire Emblem, Xenoblade Chronicles, Splatoon, and Metroid. And while my roster is far from perfect, I'm sure many of you have issues that you'd be more than happy to share with me down in the comments, I think it's pretty representative of the logistical challenges that come from trying to scale down Smash's roster so heavily. There really is no way to please everyone. And even if we did make a roster that pleased most people, Smash fans are a famously fickle bunch. If we change any of these legacy characters too much, we run the risk of alienating people who liked them in the past games. I still see people complaining about how they changed Luigi's grab in Ultimate. Then there's the question of DLC, because any DLC speculation would inevitably be full of people requesting old favorites come back. 3 of Smash 4's 7 DLC characters were returning veterans, and at that point they had only cut a total of 11 characters from the series. Now imagine if they cut over 40. And while fans of other fighting game franchises might be used to characters disappearing after their one entry, Smash Bros. Has maintained a pretty consistent track record of only getting bigger. Even when there were cuts, the roster was always a sizable amount larger, so much so that I would argue a large part of the appeal of this series to casuals is that scale. You and I might be able to sit down and talk about how there's no way this series can just keep getting bigger and understand why certain cuts had to be made, but you gotta remember, a lot of people are very stupid. And I don't know if most general consumers would be able to see this as anything other than taking away what was already there. Smash fans are well known for being loud and annoying when it comes to their character picks, and while, to an extent, I don't think we should necessarily cater every series to their most hardcore fans, I don't know if the wider Nintendo community would be able to bear Smash losing some of their favorites. We all saw what the National Dex thing did to Pokemon. A change that in retrospect really wasn't that big of a deal has left the fandom permanently shattered. And this would be that, but way more devastating because Smash characters stem from other already existing IPs with their own fan bases. There are characters who the general public would not give two shits about if it wasn't for the fact that they were in Smash Bros. And we can argue all day about whether or not they should care more about the source material, or if that's even a fair thing to put on the Smash series in the first place, but you can't deny that the popularity of Smash outweighs the popularity of many franchises that find themselves on the roster. And in the worst cases, Smash Bros. Serves as the last faint echo of a series' existence. F-Zero, Star Fox, Mother, and at this rate probably stuff like Punch-Out and ARMS only really continue to exist through Smash. I would argue characters like Ness and Lucas would be first on this hypothetical chopping block, and considering most modern Mother fans found them through Smash Bros, I have a hard time believing they wouldn't take this personally. My favorite Smash characters are King K. Rool, the Wii Fit Trainer, and Min Min, and I can't imagine a reality where any of these three stay unless they find Min Min's moveset interesting enough to keep. And most people hate that moveset, so even that's a pipe dream. All this to say, I think a lot of people say they would be happy with a reboot or a more lateral move, but I don't think everybody who says this actually would be. All it would take would be some small change that a niche community didn't agree with, and this game would be the worst thing Nintendo has released since Tears of the Kingdom. So if getting smaller isn't the answer, is the solution to go bigger? Could Smash Bros. Feasibly make a roster even larger than Ultimate's? Well, yes and no. Do I think re-implementing all 89 characters from Super Smash Bros. Past, as well as dealing with all the licensing and copyright nightmares that entails, alongside possibly adding even more, is a Herculean task? Absolutely. But I don't think it's an impossible one. That almost assuredly fake leak from earlier actually spelled out a timeline that I think is quite likely. The game director says, yeah, that would be an insane thing to do, and Nintendo says, do it anyway. And if anyone on the planet could make that work, it would be Sakurai. Ultimate was allegedly developed in a rushed time frame, starting development immediately after DLC wrapped up for Smash 4, and as such reused several assets to speed up development. Theoretically, they could do that again for a potential successor. I imagine a lot of Ultimate's dev time was spent recreating older assets from Melee and 3DS with a level of detail more appropriate for HD hardware, but the work on that stuff is already done. And based off what we've seen of the new Mario Kart, it's not like the Switch 2 is going to be so much more graphically powerful that everything will need a visual facelift to that same degree. And this argument applies to characters too. Assuming we're reusing a lot of stuff, that frees up resources to give at least a few of those older fighters the reworks that we've been dreaming of. Plus, while licensing will be difficult, I'm willing to bet that most of the companies involved would be completely fine with their characters making reappearances. Smash is like the world's greatest advertisement, and as mentioned earlier, a lot of franchises have garnered more mainstream appeal just from being in Smash Bros. Do I think this is the most likely option? Not by a long shot. But I do think there is just the slightest chance that this may happen, and we shouldn't dismiss the idea entirely. Also, it's not worth completely writing off that they might just re-release Smash Ultimate as Smash Ultimate Deluxe. Like, we all assume they won't because of backwards compatibility, but that hasn't stopped other large gaming companies, and Nintendo is pretty weird sometimes. They might just do it anyways. I don't think it's too out of line to suggest that most people would buy a deluxe version of this game if it promised more content or even just had all the DLC on the cartridge. Like, it would be criticized, especially if they charged the new industry standard of $70, but people would still buy it, and that saves Nintendo the effort of having to think about this conversation for another decade. And if we did want to actually reboot Smash Bros, as we probably do at some point because oh my god, we can do it during the same console generation as this deluxe game, because then it'll be viewed as a side thing as opposed to a direct continuation, and if that takes off, so be it. I think my dream for the next Smash is something that builds off the gameplay and roster of Ultimate while allowing for more consistently enjoyable online play. I don't think that's a very likely outcome, but what can I say? I'm superficial. I like the big roster. I like a lot of stages. I like people not complaining that their fave didn't make it back. Realistically, the final product will probably be a middle ground of these two ideas. Maybe they don't cut everyone just the obvious dead weight and still manage to bring a massive roster. But again, can they go bigger than 89 characters? Would anyone even want that? I don't know. But what I do know for sure is that Smash hype is officially back on the menu. And while I am a far older man than I was the last time this train got on the track, I am just as excited to see what comes next, whatever form it ends up taking. See ya!